subtitles aren't embedded, they can be viewed on the 2 streaming platforms, and the links are in the chat now. So please do click on those links if you want to have the subtitles. Participants are please invited to type any questions or comments. You will see 2 different boxes. There's the Q&A box, and there's also the chat box. If you have questions, please do use the Q&A box. Otherwise, you can introduce yourselves and make any comments you like about useful resources in the chat box, and please do interact. Thanks. So moving on to the agenda of today's exciting session. Well, we have 2 main parts of the agenda. The part 1 is on getting practical. We have a couple of exciting examples and testimonies about ICT and inclusion in education from Rwanda and from the Balkans. And then part 2 will be a panel discussion with a host of distinguished speakers talking about how to unleash the potential of ICT for inclusion of all learners. And we're going to follow that with a Q&A session. So please think of some questions to ask us. We'll either answer them live or write in the chat box and follow up later. And then we'll have some closing remarks. Okay, so first of all, I wanted to just set the scene a little bit, the context. Why are we talking about ICT, information communication technology? Well, it supports inclusive education for children with disabilities by enabling them to overcome some of the barriers causing their exclusion. We should say at the outset, we only see ICT as complementing and absolutely not replacing other key face-to-face methods. And of course, approaches like teacher training on IE and inclusive pedagogy. It should be part of that and not replace it. Children with disabilities, especially girls, are already more likely to be excluded from advances in digitalization. And they were largely left behind when remote learning solutions were put in place during the pandemic, as many of you know. So more than ever, there's a need to provide appropriate devices and software, which have to be tailored to the needs of each learner. That's crucial and based on an individualized education plan. Next slide, please. So just a few points on all the conditions that we need to use for the effective use of ICTs in inclusive education. Of course, political will is paramount, especially if we need to scale up any of these pilot approaches we're trying to use. But beyond that, we of course need coordination across sectors and different actors. We need the core infrastructure for ICTs, electricity, internet, access, etc., and affordable quality education equipment, Without that, it won't work at all. But we also need to work alongside the health and rehabilitation sector and have their support. We can't do it as an education sector alone. And perhaps most importantly, IT competence for teachers, parents, and learners. How often have we seen a pile of devices that are left untouched when people don't have the skills to use them? Okay, so that's a little flavor of what we'll be talking about today. On the next slide, I will be able to talk to you about some resources that are just launched from both HI and Save the Children. And hopefully you should see in the chat some links to these resources. The first one is a fact sheet on ICT, supporting the inclusion of children with disabilities in education. This fact sheet draws on a study that was carried out by Humanity and Inclusion, which drew up an inventory of existing ICT. This study was looking at challenges in implementing ICT in classrooms in Benin, Burkina Faso, Madagascar, Mali, Morocco, Niger, Senegal, and Togo. And it highlights what's actually needed for ICT to work effectively in low-income contexts. One note about the inventory, it enables users to search through a range of different potential options that are out there and rate the ICT materials in terms of scope of use, feasibility and cost in a user-friendly way. So please do click on the link. Also, Save the Children have an exciting new resource and toolkit, which is a reference for all staff working in education programming. And it's open source. And there's going to be a website and app to follow. And please do join their launch on March the 1st. This toolkit recommends resources, best practices, key ingredients to strengthen all aspects of inclusive education programming to enable greater success in the provision of high quality inclusive education and ECD. So that's some useful resources for you, hopefully, and do check them out. So there's going to be two parts to this session today. Part one, the Getting Practical, where I'm delighted to introduce two exciting examples and speakers. Firstly, Marie-Rose Natuya from Humanity and Inclusion Rwanda. And then we'll move to Dalila Basic, who is from Save the Children International Bosnia and Herzegovina, and both will show videos showing real life ICT in action. And then part two is more of a panel discussion. So in the panel discussion, I will be posing some questions to various different distinguished experts in the field. We'll start with a video message from Daniela Bass, who is from the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, UNDESA, and then moving to Deepti Samantraja from the Social Sustainability and Inclusion Global Practice at the World Bank. We're delighted to welcome her. And moving to Shitaye Astawez, who is from the African Disability Forum, and she'll be providing her vast experience in this area. And then our final panelists are Abdul Karim Abdou Madougou from the Fédération Nigérienne des Personnes Handicapées. Pardon my French. We will have, as we said before, French channel is available. So when he's speaking in French, please do check the English channel so you can understand in English if you are following in English. And finally, Joshua Joza, who is from the US International Agency for International Development. And Lena Olsen-Som will close out with some remarks and way forward. And she's from the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation. So that's it for our exciting agenda and lineup today. So I'm going to, without further ado, move swiftly on to our first speaker, which is in part one. And that our speaker is Marie-Rose. Marie-Rose, delighted to have you here. Marie-Rose has spent 15 years in the field of inclusive education, working in diverse roles in schools, including as a psychologist and an IE teacher training coordinator, and is now an inclusive education project manager at Humanity Inclusion Rwanda. Marie-Rose, could you tell us what have you been doing in HI Rwanda in terms of supporting children with disabilities with ICT? Over to you, Marie-Rose.
Thank you, Julia. I'm Marie-Rose Kawiha. I'm Inclusive Education Project Manager. My contribution to this event is sharing experience from Rwanda on the use of technology in Rwandan schools to enhance the learning of children with disabilities. Increasing access to quality and inclusive learning and teaching materials for all schools to enhance the learning of children with disabilities and those without disabilities is key to quality education. At Humanity and Inclusion Rwanda, we have been using ICT to support children with disabilities for a number of years, such as training teachers to use software on computer to easily create more visual teaching and learning materials, such as using pictograms and symbols, like creating visual timetables, posters, worksheets, and to make communication books for learners with communication impairments. These have been proved very popular, especially to help children to communicate their everyday needs if they are not well understood, and to take part more in class. More recently, we have been adapting government primary textbooks into accessible digital textbooks, primarily to support learners with visual impairment, but also learners with print disabilities, using the Universal Design for Learning approach. In addition, eKitabu has adapted English textbooks for primary one under UNICEF funds and is being used in some inclusive model schools supported by Humanity and Inclusion. Schools have received tablets, and each tablet has different audio storybooks and adapted English content for primary 1 level uploaded within it. The adapted contents are accessible for children with hearing and visual impairment because they have audio and sign language embedded in the lessons. Other children without disabilities in the class also enjoy the excitement of reading audiobooks, and it increases their motivation to learn. Furthermore, the audiobooks help children with limited fine motor skills to read from one page to another page without any problem. We have the short video. It shows some clips on the tablets in use in the inclusive model schools with learners with and without disabilities, and some opinions of some of the teachers. It's the videos on the use of tablets.
Hano muri groupe scolaire Musave Catholique twahawe tablet 15 zo gufasha mu myigire y'abana, cyane cyane abana bafite ibibazo mu myigire.
Tablet zaradufashije cyane, by'umwihariko cyane mu isomo ry'Icyongereza, zatubashishije kugira ngo abana bagire access kuri technology, waba afite ubumuga bw'ingingo cyangwa se ubwo mu mutwe, bikamubashisha kuba yabasha gusoma cya gitabo mu buryo bumworoheye butandukanye n'ubwundi udafite ubumuga.
Izi tablet aho twaziboneye kubera amasomo arimo agaragara nka audio ndetse harimo na gestures cyangwa se sign language, bifasha wa mwana ufite ubumuga kwiga agakurikira isomo. Cyane cyane ko muri izi tablet twahawe zirimo amasomo ajyanye n'amasomo arimo bino bitabo twigishirizamo. Ibyo rero bifasha wa mwana ufite ikibazo ubumuga bwo kutumva n'abandi bafite imyigire yo hasi kubera ko harimo amasomo abakurura.
Tutabasha kumva abasha kubona ya video iriho ica amarenga, akaba yabasha kumenya ikintu turi kwiga nawe mu by'ukuri nubwo atabasha kumva. Byaradufashije cyane pe, kandi n'abandi nabo bakaba included mu isomo, bakaba babasha nabo kubona rya somo turi kwiga, amashusho cyane, amashusho arabakurura cyane. Iyo uziri kuzikoresha ubona abana pe bari active, baparticipa, bishimye.
Imbogamizi dufite, abarimu twahuguwe turi abarimu bakeya cyane, kandi abana bakeneye kwigira kuri izi tablet ni benshi mu kigo.
Kugira ngo abana bose babashe kuyikoresha haracyarimo ikibazo, ni nkeya.
Dufite abana bafite ubumuga, abana 49 mu kigo ahangaha, ariko dufite tablet 15 zonyine. Murumva ko ari abana bagikeneye tablet.
No kuba batazicyura iwabo, kugira ngo wenda icyo atumvise mu ishuri ababyeyi bamufashe cyangwa abaturanyi, mbese cyangwa yongere abisubiremo, asubire muri bya bindi yize.
Twahuguye abarimu nyuma yo kuva mu mahugurwa, ariko mu by'ukuri ntago twabahugura bose, tukaba dusaba ko mwadufasha guhugura abandi barimu. Izi tablet twahawe zifasha abana kwiga, ariko dufite imbogamizi kuri curriculum ya leta iteganya amasomo 5 makuru yigwa mu mashuri abanza, ariko izi tablet zirimo isomo ry'icyongereza gusa. Bityo tukaba twifuzaga ko n'andi masomo, imibare, ikinyarwanda, ubumenyi n'ikoranabuhanga riciriritse ndetse n'imbonezamubano, ayo masomo yashyirwa nka bino bitabo abana bakayiga, kugira ngo babana n'ubundi bafite ibibazo byihariye nabo babashe kugira access kuri ayo masomo.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Marie-Rose. That was really interesting. And please do feel free to add some questions that you might have for Marie-Rose later on. Okay, now I'm going to move on to Dalila Bazik. Dalila has 10 years of experience in different local and international NGOs and is currently working as the Inclusive Education Program Manager in the Save the Children Northwest Balkans. So Dalila, please can you share with us how you've shifted to online approaches to support learners with disabilities as a result of the COVID pandemic?
Thank you, Julia. A warm welcome from me, and I would like to greet everyone on behalf of the Save the Children Northwest Balkan team. It's our great pleasure to be able to actually share our good practices on such a big and important event. As Julia mentioned, I'm working as a Inclusive Education Program Manager in the Save the Children Northwest Balkans, and currently I'm mostly involved in implementing one project, Inclusive for All, that is funded by the Italian Agency for Development Cooperation, ICT. With this project, we were able to open another 2 centers for development of inclusive practices in another region in Bosnia and Herzegovina. These centers are community-based services that are placed in schools in order to support inclusion in education and provide rehabilitation support for children with disabilities in their local communities. The centers have been proven as a great and unique model in Bosnia to support actually children, parents, and teachers, as well as other stakeholders in creating a more inclusive society. Since we are on this session, as Julia said, talking about the use of ICT to put forward inclusion, I will show with a really small video how we created an initiative, and actually this initiative started during the lockdown in Bosnia and Herzegovina caused by the outbreak of COVID-19. For several months, schools were closed, all schools were closed, and all education switched to online. A great deal of the time, children were not allowed to leave their houses since they were seen as the biggest, let's say, transmissioners for the virus. So it was a quite challenging period, especially because exclusion and access to education was denied for a lot of children. So we started, had a couple of years with the Centers for Inclusive Practices, how to make these things better. So if we can continue with the video, I think everything will be said through that. Thank you.
我哪怕在那遇到了，他得做白克拉奶茶。
Thanks so much, Dalila, for that amazing video. Food for thought and excellent to show the interaction between different services, rehabilitation and other services coming together with education and using ICT. Great. Now moving swiftly on, and please do keep coming up with questions for our first two speakers, but we're moving swiftly on to our panel discussion now. And we're going to begin with a message from Daniela Bass, who is a political scientist and journalist, previously an advisor for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and for the presidency of the Council of Ministers in Italy, amongst many other roles, also advisor to the Vice President of the European Commission on Human Rights, Democracy and Social Affairs. Roll the video, please, Camilla.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished colleagues, I'm glad to address you during the second Global Disability Summit. At the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, DESA, we have a mandate and commit ourselves to advance disability rights with the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and policies for social development to be sustainable and inclusive for all people of all ages and abilities. One thing that we have to underline is that when it comes to improving technologies, assistive technologies, they have to be thought to promote the independence of the physical independence as well of students, often their children and youth, but also of the lifelong learners, and they are often adults. And I'll give you an example. What about eyeglasses or wheelchairs? So in alignment with the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, institutions and mechanisms needed to be coherent and coordinated for achieving the SDGs for and with persons with disabilities. So achieving disability inclusion cannot be the sole responsibility of any particular stakeholder. An example is the present pandemic and how digital technologies and assistive technologies have and can contribute to respond to the needs of learners. And this was an effort of many stakeholders, the public sector, the private sector, the civil society as a whole, and people interested as well. So when it comes to a disability inclusive pandemic response, then recovery is something that has to be thought in order to build back better. And it should also be led by learners with the disabilities themselves. And then it requires forging partnerships. It requires addressing the gap of inequalities, expanding access to technologies and strengthening institutions to create a more inclusive, accessible, and sustainable post-COVID-19 world. And therefore also the Sustainable Goal 4 that tackles education. So to have some examples of assistive technologies, products, and services, then these have to be also game changers for many persons with disabilities in maximizing their potential. And so to see this, it is enough to look over the past decades. Let's see what assistive technologies, or AT, did, both high and low technologies, and then also what the Perkins Braille did, or the hearing aids that were created, and wheelchairs and screen readers. So all of these were and are and will be solutions that have to be designed and provided in an accessible way. Think that in developing countries where 80% of persons with disabilities live, only 35% of households has a computer, and 41% has internet access at home. At least these data goes back to 2016 when we prepared the flagship on disability and development. Now, the good news is that accessibility gaps can still be filled if we move fast. Public institutions and the private sector have their responsibilities and the role they play on technologies to address issues that can cause the lack of accessibility, affordability, availability of technological products, devices, services, as well as capacity gaps. And we must work together and in partnership, also with all the rest of the civil society and other stakeholders, especially, I reiterate, the private sector, that have their important roles to play in technological progress in line with CRPD and the Sustainable Development Goal 17 that stipulate and promote international cooperation to leave no one behind. We can and we must move fast. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that. And now we're going to move on to our first panelist. If I can turn to you first, Deepti. In the spirit of partnership, as just mentioned by Daniela, Deepti Samant Raja is a social development specialist in the Social Sustainability and Inclusion Global Practice of the World Bank. And she supports implementation of disability inclusion education in African program and in the Inclusive Education Initiative. She's previously worked in a number of different roles, including in the Global Initiative for Inclusive ICTs. So Deepti, could you tell us a little bit about the recent report you just launched on this topic and what you found on how ICT can help advance inclusion in society and to what extent ICT is currently integrated in development policies and programming?
Thank you, Julia. It is a pleasure to be with you all today. Development programs are increasingly using technology to deliver government services, provide information, and engage with beneficiaries. This really raises the stakes to ensure that these technologies are accessible and become facilitators and are not new roadblocks to inclusion. The World Bank's Inclusive Education Initiative recently released its landscape review of ICT for disability inclusive development, which found that while there are success stories to learn from, accessibility and inclusion are not yet integrally woven into development programs. Insights from multiple stakeholders, including teachers, parents and caregivers, government officials, and civil society stakeholders, cemented what many of us know, and actually, which was really nicely reflected in the wonderful video that Marie-Rose played for us earlier today. That the successful use of technology for education really requires a comprehensive ecosystem approach. Let me share some of these insights, and I'm going to use the EdTech Hub's 6 P's framework. So the first P or key area is people. We actually need more and not less human engagement when we use technology in development. Currently, teachers, parents, and other educational support figures lack sufficient expertise in supporting children with disabilities to take advantage of ICT. The next obstacle is products. Many mainstream EdTech devices and software are too expensive for families and schools to access easily. And many products also fail to be truly inclusive of children with more complex needs. Pedagogy. There is a lack of understanding about effective pedagogical approaches to address the educational needs of children with disabilities using technology. Policy. Existing policies for inclusive education and for ICT are often separate. And they make that, making it difficult to really coordinate across government bodies with fragmented responsibilities or between actors working in different areas. Place is crucial. And what we are finding is that because of the way education systems and financing have been traditionally structured, children in special schools tend to have better access to assistive technology than children with disabilities in mainstream schools. And often they don't have technology they need at home either. So during COVID-19, many families struggled with access to devices, internet availability, data packages, and accessible learning materials, which finally brings us to provision. Funding mechanisms and procurement processes can make or break the sustainability of many initiatives. So look, we really need to use these lessons to improve our development investments going forward. And our report makes some recommendations. To start with, we have to enable massive scale distribution of evidence-based small scale innovations by improving the matchmaking between policymakers, between the purchasers and users of technology, and the producers of technology. We must shape markets to reduce the cost of assistive and accessible ICT. We have to strengthen systems, and that includes the human resources, such as teachers. We have to adopt inclusive procurement mechanisms, and we have to invest in local tools that align with country needs. Now, none of these efforts will be effective without stakeholder buy-in, and we must work with parents, with caregivers, with the children, with organizations of persons with disabilities to ensure that they're involved in this process. A lot of times we are speaking with the same actors. We have to break out of that and bring new and more voices at the table. And sometimes those may be mainstream technology providers or mainstream education practitioners that haven't focused on inclusion of children with disabilities. And finally, let's together continue to capture better data and evidence to inform our policy making so that we can intervene early and map and monitor our progress. Thank you, and I look forward to questions.
Thanks so much, Deepti. And it was so valid what you were saying about looking outside our bubble, so going to new actors and to see what else we can do to bring others on board to make this happen. Thanks a lot, and looking forward to speaking to you later on in the question session. So if I could move now to Shitaye Astawes, who has a lived experience of disability and is a long-time disability activist in Ethiopia. In the 25-year history of the Ethiopian umbrella organization of the Federation of Ethiopian Associations of Persons with Disability, she's been the first and only female executive director. It's great to have you here, Shitaye. I know you wanted to bring in the perspective of the African context, so could you explain some key ingredients for ICT for learners with disabilities to be successful in your context and how different actors can contribute?
Thank you, Julia. Good morning, good afternoon, all. Yes, as Julia introduced me, I'm Shitaye Astawes from the African Disability Forum. The African Disability Forum is a regional or continental setup forum.
We've lost you, Shitaye. Could you try, if we could see if we can get you back? Otherwise we could, oh, there, we've got you back.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Julia. And I would like also to take this opportunity to thank Humanity Inclusion and the Save the Children for using this opportunity and design and organize the important side event. I work for now the African Disability Forum. The African Disability Forum is a continental forum that seeks to strengthen and unify the representative voices of Africans, which are the national federations of persons with disabilities to benefit their families and organizations as well. EDF, under its membership, has already 44 member national federation, 8 continental organizations of persons with disabilities, and also 4 sub-regional organizations. So I will talk on 3 core issues, but most of the elements had been already mentioned by the 2 previous speakers. But still, I would like to give emphasis on accessibility of ICT, specifically, as Julian also indicated already, from the African perspective. For learners with different types of impairments to benefit, I mean, for them to benefit from the ICT provision, the ICT materials should be easily and locally available. And it should be also affordable. Concerning the affordability situation, one of our panelists from the World Bank already explained it very properly. Cost is really an issue. And of course, the equipment and all ICT materials also needs to be user-friendly in line with different types of impairments. Because we are interested on learners for this specific plan, and we are thinking of children, school-age children with impairments. We also need, I believe, very adaptable and flexible curriculum in the education systems. So making methodology flexible and also making it tailored to the specific needs of even an individual student with a kind of impairment will be also very, very much important. And we also need like supporting the technology support mechanism or supporting intervention to make technology familiarized with the user and to maximize also know-how and optimizing usage of ICTs across Africa. And then while this is what we need for learners with impairments or for all learners to use ICT, then what we look into is also what's the practice, what is the present reality. I mean, specifically for the African context. In general, Africa in usability or in using ICT is showing a significant change and progress. But still, when it comes to inclusive ICT, usability and service delivery, we do have such situations like inclusive initiatives are mainly poorly funded. And if there is a service, a kind of service, that service mainly based on, of course, again, in our real context on smartphone usage, where most people live in rural setups across Africa. Even with issue of smartphones tablets are still costly and expensive to this situation, and for the majority of learners with disabilities. And you know, the current, like, because of the pandemic and frequent drought and civil wars, you know, how affected by severe poverty, and the poverty effect maximized on learners with impairments and disabilities. So where inclusive funding and budgeting are also almost nil when we think of inclusive education delivery. So this is the situations. And for my last point, then, while this is a broad overall situation, there could be a lot of other important core aspects to make ICT accessible or inclusive for all learners. But I want also to just throw 2-3 pointers. Then how do actors or development partners contribute to this real dim situation across the continent? Yeah, as CRPD.
I think we might have lost you, Shitaye, but thanks so much for your contribution. You made a really valid point, especially in terms of the challenge of funding and the additional challenges that will put this right down to the bottom of the agenda. So, and that's what the GDS is about, to try and make a case for additional crucial funding from other sources for ICT, whether it's government, private, partnerships, etc. Okay, I'm going to move to the next speaker now, since you have frozen, but thanks so much for your contribution. Abdul Karim Abdou Madougou from the Fédération Nigérienne des Personnes Handicapées is here with us.
Sorry,
okay.
Just yeah.
Oh, sorry, we thought you'd frozen.
Yeah,
we're going to move on to the next speaker now, Shitaye, if that's okay. But we'll come back to you during the question and answer. Thank you so much. Sorry for that technical issue. Okay. So Abdul is a director of the programs for the Fédération Nigérienne des Personnes Handicapées. He manages several projects on inclusive education in partnership with organizations like Save the Children. He's blind and has a lived experience of how ICT can support children with disabilities in their education. Welcome to you, Abdul. Abdul will speak in French, so please use the English channel for translation. And the video will be rolled now from you answering the questions. You were answering, can you tell us some best practices in terms of using ICT for learners with a range of disabilities and the role of different actors in delivering ICT? We're going to play your video, Abdul, if that's okay, since you've already pre-recorded it.
Oui, ça va.
Yeah, okay, since we're not sure about the connection, but thank you so much for joining us, and you're here for questions and any comments. Thank you so much. Over to you, Camilla.
Bonsoir, je m'appelle Abdul
Good evening. My name is Abdul Karim Abdul Magodo. I'm from Niger. I'm a blind person. I work for
des personnes handicapées. Personnellement, je pense que les meilleures pratiques sont celles qui permettent aux apprenants, à tous les apprenants, y compris les apprenants handicapés, la possibilité d'être autonomes, le plus autonome possible dans leur apprentissage. Les personnes handicapées ont souvent ou toujours, devrais-je dire, besoin d'un accompagnement souvent individualisé dans le système éducatif. Or, dans la plupart des pays, il n'y a pas assez de moyens qui sont alloués à l'éducation des personnes handicapées. Voilà pourquoi le soutien individualisé manque pour les enfants. Alors pour moi, les meilleures pratiques dans l'utilisation des TIC pour l'éducation de tous les apprenants, ce sont les pratiques qui permettent de rendre autonomes au maximum les apprenants handicapés particulièrement, dans leur apprentissage. Par exemple, au Niger, dans le cadre d'un projet que notre fédération a mis en œuvre en collaboration avec Save the Children, nous avons mis en place un programme de soutien aux enfants handicapés scolarisés en utilisant les nouvelles technologies. Par exemple, nous avons acheté des lecteurs MP5 que vous voyez ici. Sur ces lecteurs MP5, nous avons mis les enregistrements audio pour les enfants avec handicap visuel.
With visual impairments. Children with visual impairments learn orally. They listen since they cannot see. And they also use Braille, but the lessons that we have recorded in audio, and we have downloaded them in these materials. And this allows the children to come back to these lessons as many times as they wish, whether at school or at home, and to be able to come back to these lessons. The same lessons for hearing impaired children have been recorded in video format, in sign language, in a role-playing format. Concretely speaking, we took sign language specialists who translated these lessons into sign language, showing a teacher using sign language in front of a class of learners who also use sign language. This allows the child with hearing impairment who does not hear to use this material to also be able to study independently. The same material were given to children with intellectual deficiencies. Persons with intellectual disabilities need a lot of repetition, a lot of pedagogy to be able to assimilate the lessons. So this material allows them to come back, to repeat as much as they want at home or at school by facilitating the assimilation of lessons for these children with visual impairments. Given that the program has intervened in rural areas where access to electricity is not easy, we have provided a solar charger with each MP5 player. And the use of this, through the use of solar energy, this allows the pupils to charge their equipment, and the solar chargers are also equipped with light. This light gives the families of these children lighting at night. And this is also something very important. First of all, I think
rôle incombe d'abord à l'État. Les États, ils sont très nombreux, plus de 180 à nos jours, qui ont ratifié, par exemple, la Convention relative aux droits des personnes
By the
handicapées.
Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. This convention, in its Article 4 and its Article
4, assujettit les États qui ont ratifié cette convention, les États comme mon pays, par exemple le Niger, à prendre des mesures d'égalité des chances pour assurer à tous les enfants handicapés, sur la base de l'égalité avec les autres enfants, la possibilité de pouvoir étudier. Et en s'appuyant sur ces deux articles-là, et sur l'article 2 aussi, définition qui met sur la table la question de la conception universelle, il revient d'abord à l'État de créer les conditions pour profiter de toutes les opportunités qu'offre l'éthique pour assurer aux enfants handicapés la possibilité de pouvoir étudier et de pouvoir étudier sur la base de l'égalité avec les autres enfants sans handicap. Le rôle de nous, organisation des personnes handicapées, c'est de pouvoir continuer à faire le plaidoyer auprès des autorités et aussi à servir de liaison entre les personnes handicapées elles-mêmes et les États, entre les personnes handicapées elles-mêmes et la coopération internationale pour, disons, catégoriser les besoins des personnes handicapées et travailler avec les acteurs concernés pour que les besoins spécifiques des personnes handicapées dans le domaine éducatif puissent être pris en compte. Et quelle est la place de ces outils dans la promotion de l'inclusion des personnes handicapées? Je pense qu'elles ont un rôle central dans la mesure où elles aident à briser les barrières qui font obstacle à la participation des personnes handicapées dans tous les domaines. Merci.
Thanks so much, Abdul, for that. I can already see some questions coming in.
Déjà quelques questions. Comment est-ce qu'on peut faire?
Contracts with no electricity, so I feel sure you'll be able to answer. We're going to first of all move to our last speaker, but be prepared for a question coming your way. Okay, so on to our final speaker, last but absolutely not least, it's Joshua Josa, who is Inclusive Education Specialist at the USAID Center for Education. In his current role, he focuses on ensuring programming is truly education for all by promoting the inclusion of marginalized populations, including individuals with disabilities, throughout the education continuum. Welcome, Joshua. So coming from a more global perspective, it would be interesting to hear your thoughts on the key ingredients that need to be in place for ICT for learners with disabilities to be successful, and also how all the different stakeholders can contribute. Over to you, Joshua.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Good morning, all. My name is Josh Josa. I'm here with USAID Center for Education. I'm here representing the All Children Reading Grand Challenge for Development. The Grand Challenge for Development is a partnership between USAID, World Vision, and the Australian government. The three of us have been working together since 2011, funding more than 80 different innovators worldwide. Disability inclusion is one of our focus areas, and we've already identified and expanded on some of the commitment to ed tech solutions that will address barriers for children with disabilities, making sure that they are able to read and write. Different types of resources for ed tech to support students with disabilities that are successful have been, we have some lessons learned from our previous round 2 activity, supporting those students who are blind or have low vision. There are 6 different lessons learned, which I will share with you today. Organizational capacity, being able to support students with disabilities, really impacts the quality of the intervention. Organizations work should then match the technical solution they're providing the student and meeting their needs and their skills to use that technology and capacity to engage with the student. Also, students need to be motivated to want to use technology. Parents also and guardians are also an essential role in this process. That will cause more successes if they are engaged. We do have local productions that will make content, will improve the students' accessibility to learning materials. And lastly, interaction with government officials can then galvanize and improve project expansion for the future. What this looks like in implementation and practice, there are 3 different things. We have funded some free and open source solutions that help include children with disabilities. Some of those are accessible books in underserved languages, digital libraries, accessible book creation software, and accessible EPUB toolkits, as well as other toolkits to support sign language, book storytelling, and production. We have also funded inclusive assessments. We have adapted some early grade reading assessments for children and youth who are blind as well as deaf. And the reason we've done that is to better analyze their outcomes and valid and reliable results of the assessment to make it more inclusive. And also we have an exciting announcement today for you all. USCDO and Girls Education Challenge, as well as All Children Reading Grand Challenge, have partnered to work on assistive technology brief that will be released, and it will give you important procedural goals and lessons learned that we've had so far to create inclusive learning assessments for children. That will provide a framework for funders, implementers, and researchers, so they can all take a look at that and use that as guidance for developing and implementation of more inclusive assessments going forward. This is one example of what ACR GCD has been doing. I know there are different actors here today and how we can all contribute. You know, the challenge is we only have 1% of books worldwide that are in underserved languages and that are printed in accessible formats like large print, sign language, video. That's only 1% of all the books, and that's a challenge. But all of us different actors can band together and work in a coordinated fashion to make this equitable. I'll give you some ideas. If you are a publisher, if you are an implementing partner or an educational practitioner for government officials or organizations, if you're a publisher, go ahead and commit to taking on more accessible printing standards. If you are an NGO or an education practitioner, go ahead and make sure that your organizations with people with disabilities are included within the design and implementation of programming. And also be in close contact and consultation with those disability organizations. If you're purchasing books for educational programming, mandate that those books meet accessible requirement standards for each of the different students you're serving. If you're a government organization, go ahead and promote disability disaggregated data to make sure educational programming is disability inclusive. And also try to find the gaps that are there within the education system for students with disabilities, as well as putting in resources to address those gaps. And last but not least, promote the hiring and retention of employees with disabilities within your own organization and your programming staff, teachers, data collectors, implementers. So we have a list and wealth of information, but time is running out. So I wanted you to go ahead and look at the allchildrenreadinggrandchallenge.org for more information. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here today and looking forward to all of our progress.
Thanks so much for that, Josh. A wealth of information that you managed to get in a short period of time. So that was excellent. Right, and I can see also people are making use of the question and answer in the chat, sharing lots of useful resources. So please keep doing that. Now it's time for the question and answer session, which we've already been starting to do, as you've seen. Some of your questions have been answered in writing because we realize we don't have so much time. We've just got 5 minutes for this section. However, Please do keep answering the questions. We'll see what we can do in writing, and I will take a few of them live now. We will have chance for one live question, but before we come to that live question, I'm going to ask a very quick question, as I promised, to Abdul, who is waiting for us now. So Abdul, if you could put your camera on and check the sound. I have a question to you. A number of people have asked around the issues of low cost and low tech ICT. How can we provide ICT in a context where there's limited resources, limited internet, electricity, etc.? What are your recommendations on that? Thanks, Abdul.
Merci beaucoup. En fait, j'ai deux réponses.
Thank you very much. I have two answers. Sorry, the sound is very bad. Sorry, the interpreter says that the sound of the gentleman is very bad. I can't hear him.
Okay, Abdul, we're going to have to change your sound setting and come back to you because our interpreter can't hear you for now. Can we check again?
Est-ce que vous m'entendez mieux maintenant?
Yeah, carry on.
Yes, much better. So I was saying, I have two answers. First of all, about the costs. The example is that for the primary schools, children do not necessarily need tablets right away, mainly for the ones who are in the first or second primary school. This is why we bought MP5 players. They allow them to read and listen, but there is no artificial intelligence there. And this is far less expensive than the digital tablets. And this allows the children who are in the primary school, first year, second year, to be able to study and to be totally independent and with lesser costs. Now, about the question of electricity. What about if we don't have electricity? Well, there is solar energy that we can use. So we have put solar charger on this MP5. We have 3,000 hours of sunshine in our country. So we use the solar energy, which is totally free of charge, in order to allow the children to just charge their material in the most accessible way. So our states, the organizations, all of us, we have to work together in order to set up, as this was said by one of the speakers before me, a mechanism so that this material can be subsidized, or to create the conditions so that this could be with the lesser costs. Because for the children and also for higher education, they really need digital tablets with artificial intelligence, with accessible software. These are very high costs, and most of the persons with disability cannot afford these. Somebody said about this, and 1 person out of 5, as the lady from the World Bank was saying, they are the ones who are in the most precarious situation. They cannot afford this material, which is really essential for their education. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Abdul. I'm sorry, we're realizing we're rapidly running out of time, but hopefully all our Q&As questions have been answered in the Q&A chat box. So please do check because your question is being answered by writing. We have a chance for one live question. If I could hand over to you, is it Tujida? If I can hand over to you. If I could get help with enabling, yes, thank you.
Can you put your microphone, please?
Do you have somebody to voice your question? Oh. For the interpreters?
Bear with me, sorry, I just need to enlarge. Thank you so much for letting me present my question. And I'm very aware that we're short for time. I'll keep it concise. Thank you very much to all of the presenters. And it's been very interesting to see about all the initiatives that are happening at the moment. And so I'm thinking from an African context here. We have around 1.5 million people that I'm considering out of a wider population of 200. And so I'm specifically talking about deaf people here. And just thinking about some of the educational challenges that when we think about resources that are available, often deaf people are left behind. And so I really wanted to flag this up, where 99% of young deaf people are illiterate. And this has been going on for a very long time. And I feel like it's an issue that needs to be raised to make sure that there is inclusion from the beginning. And so my question really is, what plans are there to make sure that there is inclusion and that people are being communicated and how people are tackling this issue? Because this needs to be done at the very beginning rather than as an afterthought, because currently a high percentage of deaf people have poor literacy skills. And so I think to tackle this problem, really, people need to put forward initiatives between the early ages, between 0 to 5. Thank you.
Thanks so much for your comment there, Tujida. We really appreciate your intervention, so that's been helpful. Okay, I'm really sorry to have to wrap up, but we have been busily answering your question and answers, and we will continue to do so if you've asked any questions. So I want to hand over now to our final speaker for the closing remarks. Lena, over to you.
Thank you, Julia. Thanks for inviting Norad to give some remarks at the end of a very inspiring and engaging meeting. I'll try to be quick since we're a bit over time here. The shift to hybrid and remote education and the digital gap that we've seen since the start of the pandemic the past couple of years is making it pretty much impossible to ignore the rising inequalities. At the same time, this shift also provides opportunities to rethink education. ICT is and will continue to be part of education services, meaning that we have to be conscious and we have to be purposeful about making sure we use the right technology, but also that we use it in the right way. In this meeting, we've heard inspiring examples of different practices, different findings, and also some clear recommendations for action. There seems to be a shared understanding here, at least, that disability inclusion must be planned for when it comes to education technology, and it must also be financed. It will not happen by chance. To be realistic, there are some remaining challenges that we need to face. To actually overcome exclusion and marginalization in education, we need to lift our focus from adapting technology to individual needs, which is also important, but lifts our focus to a more system-based focus, to using technology purposefully for lifting education systems from excluding practices to inclusive practices. Today's meeting has brought in voices from a wide range of actors across different countries, sharing what actually works, but also sharing what is still missing. Our success here will depend on broad collaboration, especially with organizations for people with disabilities and people with disabilities directly. And I'm glad to hear that the private sector was also brought up in this regard. We need to step up and we need to translate our goals and principles to action. This means holding ourselves accountable and each other accountable for the commitments and the discussions that we're having this week. We in NORAD also take note of this. The Norwegian government is proud to launch a new strategy on disability inclusive development, including in education. We look forward to share more about this during the summit. We also look forward to continuing the conversation to raise the bar and to inspire new solutions to ensure inclusive quality education for all. So thank you all for attending, and we hope you'll enjoy the Global Disability Summit. Thanks.